think we're due for a rambling book massage, right? I guess one thing what was the inspiration for these books? This one, I'd always wrestled. In high school, I was a wrestler. And I wanted to write a book about wrestling from the inside as a wrestler. Because I felt like there's never any good wrestling stories. So my goal was to turn this into a good wrestling story. But I didn't really know, I was like, how do you make a wrestling story? So it was kind of like, I didn't know what I was going to do. And one day I was working. And I was like, how do I want someone to go from a nobody to winning a state championship. How do I make that into a book? And one day the song, The Freshman by the Verve Pipe came on. And it was about, at one point, one of the lyrics is how the guy breaks up with his girlfriend and he takes a week vacation and she takes a week's worth of Valium and slept. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's it. This book is going to be about a freshman who does something bad to someone, to his girlfriend, and she's going to, and he's going to have to suffer with the consequences. And now he's going to be a senior, and he's going to be all messed up over it. And it's going to be about him recovering and being happy, being able to live a life, and just accepting that. Because in the song, The Freshman by the Verve Pipe, it's like, I can't believe we'd ever die for these sins. We were only freshmen. So that's the thing, like, he has this thing he did, and he was only a freshman. And it's about him 4 years later, just all messed up over it. And just using wrestling as a cure. The story evolved from there and became its own beast. Gained its own themes and stuff, but that was the heart. That was what I was sitting there. And at the time, I was really suffering with anxiety, and so I always put a bit of myself into the books. So I was like, let me just, talk about anxiety and trying to cure anxiety and stuff to the best of everything I knew at the time of writing this book. That's where this started from. Takedown. Takedown was 2 books that I always wanted to write. I'd spent forever just toying with these ideas. And I just didn't know what to do, and eventually these 2 stories came together and became this one book. And it's kind of a spoiler for this book because I really wanted it to be a twist. So I always wanted to write this book where the twist was you're following this advanced civilization, and I wanted to show like people with flying cars and just this really advanced civilization, but like the old people just look really old and decrepit. But like normal civilization, but just advanced. I'm picturing like white egg-shaped flying cars. And at the end of the book, I wanted the twist to be that the main character is actually Noah from the Bible. And it was going to be like, this is not like a future civilization. This is in the past. And then there's like this great flood just wipes the civilization out. And that's kind of like the twist at the end. I don't know if you can notice like a man in the business suit running through the woods from water. So I ended up placing the story like in the 1920s. I went like, let's go to like the beginning of the automobile and electricity and place the story there. And I really try and kind of trick you that it's 1920s, and then at the beginning of the book, you know, it's like, surprise. So then the other book that I wanted this to be like was, there's a movie called X-Men Origins Wolverine. And the movie is, a lot of people hate it. I always liked a good X-Men movie. I thought it was okay, but a lot of people did not like it. And I once heard someone make a good point that the opening credits scene was more interesting than the whole movie, because it shows Wolverine and his brother fighting in the Revolutionary War, and then it skips forward, and also they're fighting in the Civil War, and then it skips forward again, and then they're in like some other war, and then it skips forward and they're in World War I, and then it skips forward and they're in World War II fighting, and then it skips forward and they're like in Vietnam, and the story I think kind of kicks off in Vietnam, if I'm not mistaken. That's where like the movie begins, and it's like, you mean you could have made a movie about these guys going through every American war? And I was like, man, that is a way better story. I was like, one day I want to write a book where someone can just not die for whatever reason. They go and they fight through every war, and somehow around that. And that became, well, now when I combine these two stories, I'm not starting with America. I'm starting with like the beginning of the Bible. So according to Bible chronological order, it would be like, I think like 4,000 years ago, 4,500 years ago would technically be when the flood was. If you read like the lineages of the Bible, something like that, don't quote me. But according to that, so I was like, all right, I'll just start like 4,000 years ago, and we'll go through like all these like kind of Bible stories, like the Tower of Babel and stuff, until I can get to like a jumping point where I can go into the Greeks and just kind of kick off, like it jumps from the Bible to like Greek history, because it's kind of like Babylon. So it goes like from Babylon to like neighboring with the Greeks and sharing technology, and then it moves forward from there, and it goes, you know, through Egypt, and like it doesn't start at the beginning of Egypt, but it like jumps into the middle of Egypt. It's kind of, there's other characters in the book who are like him, who can't die, who are kind of in Egypt the whole time, and at some point, like during the Roman Empire, he goes like with Cleopatra to meet in Egypt, and like kind of hears about how they've been running in Egypt ever since the flood, like running that civilization. Anyways, from there it just keeps going forward, keeps rolling, until eventually he does get to the Americas and kind of goes through every war. But that was the inspiration, was I just wanted to have like that twist ending, and then I also wanted to have that guy fighting in every war. And when I combine those two ideas together, you got this, where this basically Wolverine-like character, who's not Wolverine, but like, you know, has like a healing factor and just can't age. The only way I could get him through the story. But off a takedown. And I was like, what's my next story? I really wanted something epic. And I was reading Salem's Lot. I had it on audio. And I would like go for jogs and listen to Salem's Lot while I was running. And I remember one time I was like 2 miles from my girlfriend's house at the time. And I just remember I got to this turnaround. I think I was near the end of the book. Maybe that was where I was when the book ended. And I remember thinking, like, so spoilers for Salem's Lot, but basically Salem's Lot starts off as it's a normal town, and then these vampires kind of start to appear, and it's slow, and the story builds as like the people are slowly all getting killed off by the vampires. So at the beginning of the book, everyone's fine, and there's a couple sick people, and there's more sick people. People are disappearing, they can't figure it out, until finally by the end of the book, it's just like no one's left in the town. The main characters are fighting for their lives. And I was like, that is an awesome concept. But why would they only do one town? Like, why wouldn't the vampires, just when they decided to go for broke, why would they be like, yep, just this town? And it's like, why wouldn't they just go cover the whole thing? So I was like, that's it. I'm gonna write a book that's very similar to Salem's Lot, but it's gonna be not contained by Salem's Lot. It's gonna be wall to wall across the board, basically the whole United States, but the whole world. But the characters are focused in the United States. There's just like reports from the outside world as society collapses. And that was the main drive for this one. Main inspiration. However, I was really into Stephen King at the time, and my favorite Stephen King book is The Stand. And also, coming from Stephen King, is The Stand is the sickness breaks out, and it has like a 99.5% kill rate, and it just goes viral across the world, and you get to watch society once again like break down across the whole world, and how everyone deals with it, and how they like try to survive afterwards. And so I was like, well, so that's it. Like Salem's Lot and The Stand, if they came together and had a baby, like that's what I want to write. And so this is it. Like if vampires took over the United States, and there's even a shout out chapter to Salem's Lot. There's this chapter in Salem's Lot that is just awesome. You basically stop following any character and you follow the disease. So it starts off, and in the paragraphs, it's a bunch of short stories that get shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter as you get to the end of the chapter. And you're basically like, Billy left the chemical facility, and on the way out, he got pulled over. And when he was pulled over, the cop reached into the car to hand him the ticket. And when he did that, he got the disease on his finger or something. Like when he got back an hour later, he ate a donut and stuck that finger in his mouth. And then it was like, the cop then went to a diner to a family that was being like attacked or robbed or something, and he came in and like saved the day. Meanwhile, he infected the family. The family went to this hotel and swam in the pool, where there were 6 other families swimming in the pool, all who were affected. One of these families went out and went to a park, and they sat on a bench. 10 minutes later, so-and-so came through and sat on the same bench and got the disease on their hand. I haven't read that chapter in years. I'm just going off memory. But that is like one of my favorite chapters in a book, just how it is. And by the end of it, it's like, this person passed it to this person, passed it to this person. Like, you just like one sentence. Like where the first story, like with the cop or whatever, is like a whole page or 2. And it just shows how like it's just spread. It's everywhere now. There's no containing it. Where before that point, it's like maybe you could have contained it, and that chapter just goes to show you like it's out. And there's a chapter where it's like one night it just like the vampires go for broke, and it's just like game on. And that was inspired by this Salem's Lot, the Stand chapter. Anyway, that's the Stand and Salem's Lot inspired this one. The Great Influencer. The Great Influencer. This one came about because I was listening somewhere, and they were like, hey, did you know The Great Gatsby is going into the public domain in like 6 months or 7 or 8 months or next year or something like that? And I was like, what if I rewrote The Great Gatsby for when it becomes public domain? Like, that might be an opportunity to write an interesting book. And so I was like, well, what am I going to write it about? And I was like, well, who is flashy these days? Who is living like The Great Gatsby right now? And in my head, I was like, David Dobrik. That was right in the height of when David Dobrik was like the top YouTuber. And he was making all these videos like once a week on the same day. He'd make a video that was 4 minutes and 20 seconds long. And they were fun to watch. But it was like him, all his buddies, and then there'd just be random celebrities, and it'd just be like, just in your face. Like just flash of like all these things he did that week. Just cut into a super 4 minute and 20 second cut. And he was like on top of the world. And I was like, oh, what if I write The Great Gatsby around a character like that? Where it's like, because The Great Gatsby is the whole world. You know, everyone loves him, but they love him because of his money and the parties he's throwing. And then in the end, when tragedy strikes and he kind of loses it all, everyone abandons him. And the story's told from the narrator is actually a side character who really, really adores The Great Gatsby. And he's like so distraught at the end of the book when everyone just abandons him. He's like, oh, if you're not providing anything for us, see ya. And so I was like, I will write that, like this kind of like super YouTuber party, like just crazy lifestyle, celebrities and just mansions, and then do it from a character who has a small YouTube channel who goes in and is taken under the wing of the main character in exchange for meeting his cousin and all this stuff that happens in The Great Gatsby, because it's like about The Great Gatsby's cheating with the narrator's cousin on her husband kind of deal. And that's what makes everything hit the fan, as they say. So I put all that in there and just like, it's way more detailed. You know, The Great Gatsby is about that long. That's like The Great Gatsby. So I just kind of did that to spruce it up. The Great Gatsby exactly 100 years later. And so that's why I wrote that. Just what was crazy is nothing is dramatic in the book, but actually after it was done and this book was published and out, David Dobrik fell into all that controversy with the backhoe in the water and hurting. He got one of the people injured that films with him, and COVID kind of shut him down too. So that was his comeback. But when he was filming his comeback, he got one of the people injured, and then he basically just quit the channel after that. he switched to Snapchat now, I think. But that was the end. I was just like, at that time, I was like, wow, art imitates life, because that's kind of like a similar story to the book, you know? Hurricane Dan. When did I write it? So this book came out like 3 to 6 months before episode 1 of The Walking Dead. And I think as a society, for some reason, everyone wanted zombies. And the society was zombie craved. Zombie starved, I should say. And for whatever reason, I was one of those people. I was like, man, I want more zombies. And so I was like, I want to write a zombie book. I was like, but even more, I think what very few zombie stories get right is showing the outbreak. I was like, I really want to tell this tale of a society kind of like Dead by Dawn that's just functioning and fine, and slowly, piece by piece, it erodes and it erodes until you watch it erode and it collapses. It's like all the zombie stories, they'll show like day 1 and then it'll skip, and then the society will just be collapsed, and it'll be like a year later, us fighting for our lives. And so I just really wanted to show, like, you know, the most interesting part of a zombie outbreak is the beginning, when it's like, how do people react? How does society and all these people fight it as it's just slowly collapsing on them? So that was the inspiration for this, and this came out, and then The Walking Dead, they came out like 6 months later and was a hit. And this is probably the book that I sold the most, actually, because it was the perfect book at the perfect time. Just everyone was starved for zombies. And then The Walking Dead came out, and I think it really quenched that thirst. Now no one's zombie starved. You have more zombie material now than you could ever want. And most of it in The Walking Dead. But it all started with this. Was before that, and there was a hunger. And I think The Walking Dead did good on day 1 of trying to recreate that zombie situation. You know what I'm saying? However, this was before that, and I think I did an okay job of representing society collapsing. I also didn't want one where the people were evil. I wanted people to actually fight with each other and help each other. 'Cause in zombie stories, it always shows that, like, the bad guy, like, there's always a group of bad people who are just maliciously evil, like Negan or whatever the eye patch guy was. And it's like, yep, I just want to rule and conquer, and in the middle of this, I'm like, no. I want to show people who are honestly and truly just coming together to fight to survive. And that was the inspiration for Hurricane Dan. Apocalypse theory. I was in high school, and we had to do this assignment in English where we created a system that allowed you to do a process easier. Everyone had to pick some kind of some kind of system. I don't even know how to explain it. Like a known process that helps you accomplish a task. And so I picked the snowflake method, where you write a 1-paragraph summary of a book, and then you turn that into a 4-paragraph summary, and then you turn that into, you know, a 8 separate paragraphs that explain 8 parts of the story. And then you write a 1 sentence for every chapter. And then you write one paragraph for every chapter. And then after that, I think you do the same with the characters. And then you go in and you write every chapter off that paragraph. Anyway, something like that. It was years ago. So this was more or less the story I made in English class. It ended up being way different. But at first, like the opening chapters were designed off that story, and it just evolved. And I was working, I was hanging siding, I was hanging off a skyscraper in Manhattan, and the work just sucked. And I just wanted to be out of there. So I took like my first 2 or 3 paychecks or whatever and bought the most expensive laptop. I walked into Best Buy and was like, I want your most expensive laptop. Like, not even your best. I was like, what is the most expensive? So I bought this laptop that I had for years. And I bought it simply so I could write this book. And then once that was done, I knew I could I was hoping I could sell it and become a billionaire, and I wouldn't have to hang on skyscrapers anymore. My goal here was to rewrite basically the Lord of the Rings. So this was my high school attempt at the Lord of the Rings. I finished it in 2010, and I was in high school in 2006. So I wrote this for 4 years. But yeah, this was like, I don't know what the inspiration was. I was like, I want to write my own Lord of the Rings without ever reading books, or I just wanted to make an awesome movie, really. And it's just chaos. This book is chaos. I just put everything in it. It has zombies. It has werewolves. It has dragons. It has griffins. It has demons. It has cowboys. It has Roman soldiers. It has Civil War soldiers. It has modern day Marines, all fighting a demon army. I don't know. This book was insane. My cousin who worked at me in New York at the time, I was trying to explain it to him, and he goes, I'm just going to call that book Pop Culture. He's like, that book is just pop culture. That was funny. I was like, yeah. Chaos. After Apocalypse Theory, I was like, now what? And at the time, Twilight was a phenomenon. And I think I've been disappointed with the reception of Apocalypse Theory, as in there wasn't one at all. And so I was like, okay, I sold like 10 copies, like maybe one a month, which to me, when I'm like, this is the next Lord of the Rings, one a month is not it. So then I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to fix this? I clearly don't know what I'm doing. So then I started writing Sapiens, which I was a fan of Twilight, and I read Twilight, and I was like, what if I try to completely rewrite Twilight and I literally go chapter by chapter and I try to rewrite Twilight. Like, if the main characters are talking in Twilight, they're talking in this book. Like, I'm like, okay, right now in Twilight, this is how the first paragraph is. And then the character goes to school, and then they meet the whatever, the love interest, and they have this kind of a conversation. I went line for line, like paragraph for paragraph, and tried to rewrite Twilight in that way. So if you open this book, I suppose it's been so long now, and then you open Twilight next to it, and you read like page for page, they should be very similar books, whereas even like the dialogue is about the same length and kind of like has the same tone to it. And I was like, because Twilight was a #1 book, and I was like, I'm going to rewrite the #1 book. And then I think here, once you get here, this is kind of funny. Like this last part, I broke off of Twilight and I just went on my own. Like the story had to go its own way. And so the conflict and the resolution is completely its own. And that's the part that everyone loved the most. Like the biggest complaint is everyone's like, man, this book just rambles on. You know, in the way like Twilight does. If you're looking for action, you're getting a love story. And supernatural one. But at the end, it kind of does devolve into more action. And more of like my signature style of writing. And that's what people always think is like the best part of the book, which is cool. But it also told me like, yeah, trust yourself, you know. It's interesting that this was just a case study. This was a learning process for me just to see what did Twilight have. That's all of them I have in book form. The rest are all on Kindle.